many people on the screen. Turn off the music. All right. Howdy, 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 everybody. How are we doing? It has been a little bit. It has. I had a little bit of a health problem last week, and I've been recovering since then. But I'm back, and holy crap! Let me know if the sound is okay. It looks okay. We're gonna hop into Tucker Carlson and Putin first because that is the oldest of the news. And kind of the most pressing thing, I think. At least the most productive thing we're going to do tonight. So we're not going to do all of this, and quite helpfully at tuckercarlson.com, which is an abomination, gift Tucker Carlson Network. Why would you give someone that? That's like giving them scabies. Jesus. Probably only about the first 30 minutes. Because I think there's stuff to talk about here, and I don't really think that any of this is as pertinent, having watched it. So,
Да, это серьезный разговор. Но поскольку у вас базовое образование...
Because your basic education is in history, as far as I understand.
Yes. Тогда я позволю себе...
So if you don't mind, I will take only 30 seconds or 1 minute to give you a short reference to history for giving you a little historical background.
Please.
It was not 1 minute.
Смотрите.
Let's look where our relationship with Ukraine started from. Where did Ukraine come from? The Russian state started gathering itself as a centralized statehood, and it is considered to be the year of the establishment of the Russian state in 862, when the townspeople of Novgorod invited a Varangian prince, Rurik, from Scandinavia to reign. In 1862, Russia celebrated the 1000th anniversary of its statehood. And in Novgorod, there is a memorial dedicated to the 1000th anniversary of the country. In 882, Rurik's successor, Prince Oleg, who was actually playing the role of regent at Rurik's young son, because Rurik had died by that time, came to Kiev.
Really? The guy who was being regent to his son was dead? Oh, God.
He ousted two brothers who apparently had once been members of Rurik's squad. So Russia began to develop with two centers of power, Kiev and Novgorod. The next very significant date in the history of Russia was 988. This was the baptism of Russia, when Prince Vladimir, the great-grandson of Rurik, baptized Russia and adopted Orthodoxy, or Eastern Christianity. From this time, the centralized...
So, the first thing I think to really talk about tonight is this idea of continuity. I'm going to bring up the chart again because I made it, and we're going to get our money's worth. There's the 5 C's of historical thinking. Is there a state of Russia in the Middle Ages? Yes. Is this the same state over this 1,000 years? Absolutely not. It's very difficult, and this comes up a lot too, and that's kind of why I wanted to talk about it. For example, you'll find this particular point in Israel. Is my thing changing? Is there like a thing on the screen? Oh, it's behind. Okay. No, I don't want all of this up. My preview is behind. There we go. This comes up in two when it talks about Israel, where people try to say, yes, but Israel was a country way back in the Iron Age, and there was a kingdom of Judah and a kingdom of Israel. But to try to claim that these are contiguous states to a modern-day Israel is obviously problematic in the fact that they both ceased to exist after about 140, 150 years. So to turn around and claim that the modern state of Israel is a successor state to the kingdoms of Israel and kingdom of Judah is erroneous at best. These are the kind of things that fall under the category of myth-making. It's kind of activity that people do when they don't necessarily really want to talk about the past so much as they want to justify the present. And in this case, it's Putin justifying Russia's hold on countries like Belarus and Ukraine, or in Israel's case, it's them justifying Israel itself and their control of the West Bank and Gaza and the Golan Heights. So the problem is twofold. The first is your claim to personhood as a coherent group and your claim to a country is not dependent upon its foundations in the past. For example, the United States couldn't claim a coherent past because it emerges one day, right? There is a whole bunch of Indian American tribes here acting as largely their own nation states, and we came and supplanted them. That doesn't make the United States any less of an entity, doesn't make the American people any less of a people. And it also tends to unperson the people who were here before, who are in and of themselves people with identities and validities. Like, for example, I think a lot of us have gone and seen Destiny trying to argue that the Palestinians don't count as a people because they're not old enough, whatever the hell that means. This is kind of what this discussion is about. It's kind of about this concept of who is a valid people and who isn't. And frankly, if you're sitting there going, I am a thing, you're pretty functionally valid. It doesn't matter how far back it doesn't go, because things change over time. They change over time. So that's just something to keep in mind to start off.
Russian state began to strengthen. Why? Because of the single territory, integrated economic ties, one and the same language, and, after the baptism of Russia, the same faith and rule of the prince. The centralized Russian state began to take shape. Back in the Middle Ages, Prince Yaroslav the Wise introduced the order of succession to a throne. But after he passed away, it became complicated for various reasons. The throne was passed not directly from father to eldest son, but from the...
It's also worth noting that the Romanov family actually still exists in Russia, and would, strictly speaking, probably take Putin's job if they could.
Prince, who had passed away to his brother, then to his sons in different lines. All this led to the fragmentation and the end of Rus as a single state.
There it is, right there. So Putin is pointing out a particular point where the medieval Rus ends, where it becomes a different state. And like, this is not uncommon in the Middle Ages, because they develop incredibly complex hereditary laws around who gains control of a lord's holdings when they die. And this is incredibly common throughout Europe, right? Being able to pass a unified state down to your immediate most eldest successor is not a common thing. So things fracture into holdings a lot. And that's kind of where Putin's argument is going to fall apart.
There was nothing special about it. The same was happening then in Europe.
Right, but by the same token, we don't claim a unified a unified hold on old territories in Europe based on the one-time holdings of a given lord.
But the fragmented Russian state became an easy prey to the empire created earlier by Genghis Khan. His successors, namely Batu Khan, came to Rus, plundered.
It's unlikely that the Mongols would have not succeeded in conquering Russia anyway. Plenty of unified states fell to the Mongols.
And ruined nearly all the cities. The southern part, including Kiev, by the way, and some other cities, simply lost independence, while northern cities preserved some of their sovereignty. They had to pay tribute to the horde, but they managed to preserve some part of their sovereignty. And then a unified Russian state began to take shape with its center in Moscow. The southern part of Russian lands,
but this is critically not Rus. This is a new state.
Including Kiev, began to gradually gravitate towards another magnet, the center that was emerging in Europe.
Shout out to our good friend Lucy Hayes and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth.
This was the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. It was even called the Lithuanian-Russian Duchy, because Russians were a significant part of this population. They spoke the old Russian language and were Orthodox. But then there was a unification, the union of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and the Kingdom of Poland. A few years later, another union was signed, but this time already in the religious sphere. Some of the Orthodox priests became subordinate to the Pope. Thus, these lands became part of the Polish-Lithuanian state.
Yeah, to the best of my knowledge, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania was never referred to as the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, Russia.
During decades, the Poles were engaged in Polonization of this part of the population. They introduced their language there, tried to entrench the idea that this population was not exactly Russians, that because they lived on the fringe, they were Ukrainians. Originally, the word Ukrainian meant that a person was living on the outskirts of the state, along the fringes, or was engaged in a border patrol service. It didn't mean any particular.
Tucker Carlson is basically engaged in a full-on squint fest here. He's just done.
Particular ethnic group. So the Poles were trying to, in every.
So what Putin is doing here is he's talking about how people's identities develop over time. But he's trying to do so in such a way that makes certain identities seem less valid than others. This kind of factors into all of this. Like, why is what Putin is saying important? Isn't that he's correct or that he's being accurate. What Putin is saying is important is in terms of his view of his mythology is different because he is capable of enacting it. So that's why this is worth listening to in the first place.
Possible way to colonize this part of the Russian lands and actually treated it rather harshly, not to say cruelly. All that led to the fact that this part of the Russian lands began to struggle for their rights. They wrote letters to Warsaw demanding that their rights be observed and people be commissioned here, including to Kiev.
I beg your pardon, can you tell us what period, I'm losing track of where in history we are, the Polish oppression of Ukraine?
It was in the 13th century. Now I will tell you what happened later and give the dates so that there is no confusion. And in 1654, even a bit earlier, The people who were in control of the authority over that part of the Russian lands addressed Warsaw, I repeat, demanding that they send them to rulers of Russian origin and Orthodox faith. When Warsaw did not answer them, and in fact rejected their demands, they turned to Moscow, so that Moscow took them away. So that you don't think that I'm inventing things, I'll give you these documents.
Well, it doesn't sound like you're inventing it. I'm not sure why it's relevant to what happened 2 years ago.
But still, these are documents from the archives, copies. Here are the letters from Bogdan Khmelnytsky, the man who then controlled the power in this part of the Russian lands that is now called Ukraine. He wrote to Warsaw demanding that their rights be upheld, and after being refused, he began to write letters to Moscow, asking to take them under the strong hand of the Moscow Tsar. There are copies of these documents. I will leave them for your good memory. There is a translation into Russian. You can translate it into English later. Russia would not agree to admit them straight away, assuming that the war with Poland would start. Nevertheless, in 1654, the Pan-Russian Assembly of top clergy and landowners, headed by the Tsar, which was the representative body of the power of the old Russian state, decided to include a part.
Well, what Putin is arguing, Palm, that ultimately is that Ukraine is Russian, that there is no difference between the two. Obviously, if Hetman was here, he would object furiously, which is why he's not here. Actually, he's busy tonight.
Part of the old Russian lands into Moscow Kingdom. As expected, the war with Poland began. It lasted 13 years, and then in 1654, a truce was concluded. And 32 years later, I think, a peace treaty with Poland, which they called Eternal Peace, was signed. And these lands, the whole left bank of Dnieper, including Kiev, went to Russia. And the whole right bank of Dnieper remained in Poland. Under the rule of Catherine the Great, Russia reclaimed all of its historical lands, including in the south and west. This all lasted until the revolution.
So it's kind of more accurate to point out that the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth gradually fell under Russia's control, and over the course of the 1600s and 1700s. Lucy will probably want to talk about this in some detail someday, but what happens is the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth falls out of the ability to maintain a major power base in Europe. Prussia overtakes them, so does the Austrians, and the Habsburg Austrians, and the Russian monarchy in Russia. So like there's not really this kind of thing. It's a very deliberate process that Russia, Prussia, and Austria kind of carve up Poland and Lithuania, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and they fight a number of wars with all three countries. So like they basically get nibbled to death over a century, is really what happens to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. They kind of just sort of get eaten piece by piece by the powers around them, which doesn't make that any less valid of a country, though, which is the problem here.
Before World War I, Austrian General Staff relied on the ideas of Ukrainianization and started actively promoting the ideas of Ukraine and the Ukrainianization.
You'll notice in this entire discussion one very important thing. Putin never attributes Ukrainian nationalism to Ukrainians themselves. He attributes it to someone else weaponizing Ukraine against Russia. So Austria-Hungary fights World War I on the side of the Germans and the Ottoman Empire against Russia, Italy, France, and the United Kingdom. So you'll notice it's a very not even great sleight of hand, but it's a little bit of sleight of hand, right?
Their motive was obvious. Just before World War I, they wanted to weaken the potential enemy and secure themselves favorable conditions in the border area. So the idea which had emerged in Poland that people residing in that territory were allegedly not really Russians, but rather belonged to a special ethnic group, Ukrainians, started being propagated by the Austrian General Staff. As far back as the 19th century,
That's giving entirely too much credit to the Austrian General Staff, by the way.
theorists calling for Ukrainian independence appeared. All those, however, claimed that Ukraine should have a very good relationship with Russia. They insisted on that. After the 1917 revolution, the Bolsheviks sought to restore the statehood and the civil war began, including the hostilities with Poland. In 1921, peace with Poland was proclaimed, and under that treaty,
The other thing that he is doing and kind of missing out is, and this is important for Hetman too, is there is a period of time during the 17th century, so around the 1600s, where they have a actual period of time where the Cossacks are largely in control of the Ukrainian territory, and they label the land as Ukraine, and they believe that it is a separate state. And that's one of the things that Ukraine will pull from when they're talking about their historical past, is this period of time when they have this state within a state in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and the Kingdom of Poland.
right bank of Dnieper River once again was given back to Poland. In 1939, after Poland cooperated with Hitler,
Yeah, he's ignoring the part where Russia brutally repressed Poland during the war.
it did collaborate with Hitler, you know? Hitler offered Poland peace and a treaty of friendship, an alliance demanding in return that Poland give back to Germany the so-called Danzig corridor, which connected the bulk of Germany with East Prussia and Königsberg. After World War I, this territory was transferred to Poland, and instead of Danzig, a city of Gdansk emerged. Hitler asked them to give it amicably, but they refused.
There's two problems here. Danzig or Dansk is a free city at that time. It's Polish, but it's treaty bound to be open to anyone. It's not necessarily Poland's to give.
Of course.
Still, they collaborated with Hitler and engaged together in the partitioning of Czechoslovakia.
But may I ask you, you're making the case that Ukraine, certainly parts of Ukraine, Eastern Ukraine, is in effect Russia has been for hundreds of years. Why wouldn't you just take it when you became president 24 years ago? You have nuclear weapons, they don't. If it's actually your land, why did you wait so long?
I'll tell you, I'm coming to that. This briefing is coming to an end.
Yes, he is going to try to justify Hitler's invasion. The reality of this is that Hitler issues a kind of false flag operation. They say the Poles have attacked Germany's radio stations, and then they invade the country. They don't just invade the Danzig corridor. They invade all of Poland, if, as you probably well know, and they take all of Poland in cooperation with the Soviet Union.
It might be boring, but it explains many things.
I just don't know how it's relevant.
Good. Good. I'm so gratified that you appreciate that. Thank you. So, before World War II, Poland collaborated with Hitler, and although it did not yield to Hitler's demands, it still participated in the partitioning of Czechoslovakia together with Hitler, as the Poles had not given the Danzig corridor to Germany and went too far, pushing Hitler to start World War II by attacking them. Why was it Poland against whom the war started on 1st September 1939? Poland turned out to be uncompromising.
Why was it Poland? Because Germany was very much convinced that they could not beat France. They also weren't terribly convinced they could beat Poland, but that actually worked out for them.
Hitler had nothing to do but start implementing his plans with Poland. By the way, the USSR, I have read some archive documents, behaved very honestly. It asked Poland's permission to transit its troops through the Polish territory to help Czechoslovakia. But the then Polish foreign minister said that if the Soviet planes flew over Poland, they would be downed over the territory of Poland. But that doesn't matter. What matters is...
Yeah, the USSR doesn't really factor into the Munich agreements or anything that has to do with Czechoslovakia.
That the war began, and Poland fell prey to the policies it had pursued against Czechoslovakia, as under the well-known Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Part of the territory, including western Ukraine, was to be given to Russia.
Sure, here's a problem with this though. Like the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was not well known at that time because it was negotiated in secret. This is a very oh god, this is just ugh. I'll go hit my head on my desk now. There you win the vote.
Thus, Russia, which was then named the USSR, regained its historical lands.
Again, like pointing out that Russia and the USSR are not the same thing. The USSR is considerably bigger than Russia because it includes countries that are not Russia. Russia is a center of power in the USSR, to be sure, and we certainly used those terms interchangeably at the time. Not the same thing.
After the victory in the Great Patriotic War, as we call World War II, all those territories were ultimately enshrined as belonging to Russia, to the USSR. As for Poland, it received apparently...
And then, in 1991, the USSR ceased to be, and a number of independent republics emerged.
In compensation, the lands which had originally been German. The eastern parts of Germany, these are now western lands of Poland. Of course, Poland regained access to the Baltic Sea and Danzig, which was once again given its Polish name. So this was how this situation developed. In 1922, when the USSR was being established, the Bolsheviks started building the USSR and established the Soviet Ukraine, which had never existed before.
Right.
Hang on a second. Excuse me. Very critically, an independence movement emerges in Ukraine that he skips right over. An independence movement emerges in Ukraine throughout the course of the Russian Civil War, which would also speak to, again, a national identity. This is very easily to see as biased history.
Которой до сих пор вообще не существовало.
Stalin insisted that those republics be included in the USSR as autonomous entities. For some inexplicable reason, Lenin, the founder of the Soviet state, insisted that they be entitled to withdraw from the USSR.
образующуюся.
And again, for some unknown reasons, he transferred to that newly established Soviet Republic of Ukraine some of the lands together with people living there, even though those lands had never been called Ukraine, and yet they were made part of that Soviet Republic of Ukraine. Those lands included the Black Sea region, which was received under Catherine the Great, and which had no historical connection with Ukraine whatsoever.
It does have a historical connection with the Crimean Khanate, though, and the Tartars. So like calling it Russian would also be erroneous.
Even if we go as far back as 1654, when these lands returned to Russian Empire, that territory was the size of 3 to 4 regions of modern Ukraine, with no Black Sea region. That was completely out of the question.
In 1654.
Exactly.
And here Tucker Carlson is desperately trying to get him to talk about 2022.
Well, you obviously have encyclopedic knowledge of this region, but why didn't you make this case for the first 22 years as president that Ukraine wasn't a real country?
Да. Итак, значит, советская Украина получила.
The Soviet Union was given a great deal of territory that had never belonged to.
Hey, fuck you, Tucker Carlson. I'm going to do what I want. I'm the president of Russia.
Including the Black Sea region.
Когда Россия их получила в результате.
At some point, when Russia received them as an outcome of the Russo-Turkish Wars, they were called New Russia or Novorossiya. But that does not matter. What matters is that Lenin, the founder of the Soviet state, established Ukraine that way. For decades, the Ukrainian Soviet Republic developed as part of the USSR. And for unknown reasons, again, the Bolsheviks were engaged in Ukrainianization. It was not merely because the Soviet leadership was composed
Yep, it was the Bolsheviks that did that, not the Ukrainians.
To a great extent of those originating from Ukraine. Rather, it was explained by the general policy of indigenization pursued by the Soviet Union. Same things were done in other Soviet republics. This involved promoting national languages and national cultures, which is not a bad in principle. That is how the Soviet Ukraine was created. After the World War II, Ukraine received, in addition to the lands that had belonged to Poland before the war, part of the lands that had previously belonged to Hungary and Romania. So Romania and Hungary had some of their lands taken away and given to the Soviet Ukraine.
Yeah, Putin's next appearance will be on What If All Test.
And they still remain part of Ukraine. So in this sense, we have every reason to affirm that Ukraine is an artificial state that was shaped at Stalin's will.
Do you believe Hungary has a right to take its land back from Ukraine and that other nations have a right to go back to their 1654 borders?
I'm not sure whether they should go back to the 1654 borders.
Let's party like it's the Black fucking plague.
But given Stalin's time, so-called Stalin's regime, which, as many claim, saw numerous violations of human rights and violations of the rights of other states,
В этом смысле, конечно, вполне можно, если не говорить о том, что они имеют на это право.
One may say that they could claim back those lands of theirs while having no right to do that. It is at least understandable.
Have you told Viktor Orban that he can have part of Ukraine?
Никогда не говорил.
Never. I have never told him, not a single time.
У нас с ним даже на этот счет не было никаких разговоров. Но мне достоверно...
We have not even had any conversation on that, but I actually know for sure that Hungarians who live there
Они, конечно, хотят вернуться на свою историю.
wanted to get back to their historical land.
Интересную историю, отвлекусь.
Moreover, I would like to share a very interesting story with you. I digress. It's a personal.
Poor Tucker Carl. I almost feel sorry for Tucker Carlson throughout the course of this interview.
One. Somewhere in the early 80s, I went on a road trip in a car from then Leningrad across the Soviet Union through Kiev. Made a stop in Kiev and then went to western Ukraine. I went to the town of Beregovoye, and all the names of towns and villages there were in Russian and in a language I did not understand, in Hungarian, in Russian and in Hungarian, not in Ukrainian, in Russian and in Hungarian. I was driving through some kind of village, and there were men sitting next to the houses, and they were wearing black three-piece suits and black cylinder hats. I asked, are they some kind of entertainers? I was told, no, they were not entertainers, they're Hungarians. I said, what are they doing here? What do you mean? This is their land, they live here.
Because Hungarians are never entertaining. Suck it, Tristan.
This was during the Soviet time in the 1980s. They preserved the Hungarian language, Hungarian names, and all their national costumes. They are Hungarians and they feel themselves to be Hungarians. And of course, when now there is an infringement.
Well, that is, and there's a lot of that, though. I think many nations, they're upset about Transylvania as well, as you obviously know. But many nations feel frustrated by the redrawn borders of the wars of the 20th century and wars going back 1,000 years, the ones that you mentioned. But the fact is that you didn't make this case in public until 2 years ago, February. And in the case that you made, which I read today, you explain at great length that you felt a physical threat from the West in NATO, including potentially a nuclear threat, and that's what got you to move. Is that a fair characterization of what you said?
Я понимаю, что мои длинные диалоги,
I understand that my long speeches probably fall outside of the genre of the interview. That is why I asked you at the beginning, are we going to have a serious talk or a show? You said a serious talk. So bear with me, please. We're coming to the point where the Soviet Ukraine was established. Then in 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. And everything that Russia...
If nothing else, you've learned tonight that Putin is not a coherent teller of stories.
had generously bestowed on Ukraine was dragged away by the latter. I'm coming to a very important point of today's agenda.
Thank you.
After all, the collapse of the Soviet Union was effectively initiated by the Russian leadership. I do not understand what the Russian leadership was guided by at the time, but I suspect there were several reasons to think everything would be fine. First, I think that then Russian leadership believed that the fundamentals of the relationship between Russia and Ukraine were, in fact, a common language. More than 90% of the population there spoke Russian. Family ties. Every third person there had some kind of family or friendship ties. Common culture, common history. Finally, common faith, coexistence with a single state for centuries, and deeply interconnected economies.
Yes, a very common faith, as the Soviet Union just tried to destroy the Russian Orthodox Church.
All of these were so fundamental. All these elements together make our good relationships inevitable. The second point is a very important one.
It's a relationship so good that your country is currently 3 years, as of today, into a 2-3-day operation to conquer Ukraine.
I want you, as an American citizen, and your viewers to hear about this as well. The former Russian leadership assumed that the Soviet Union had ceased to exist, and therefore there were no longer any ideological dividing lines. Russia even agreed voluntarily and proactively to the collapse of the Soviet Union, and believed that this would be understood by the so-called civilized West as an invitation for cooperation and association. That is what Russia was expecting, both from the United States and the so-called collective West as a whole. There were smart people, including in Germany. Egon Bahr, a major politician of the Social Democratic Party, who insisted in his personal conversations with the Soviet leadership on the brink of the collapse of the Soviet Union that a new security system should
He can't even bring himself to say Gorbachev's name.
be established in Europe. Help should be given to unify Germany, but a new system should be also established to include the United States, Canada, Russia, and other Central European countries.
Yes.
But NATO needs not to expand. That's what he said. If NATO expands, everything would be just the same as during the Cold War, only closer to Russia's borders. That's all. He was a wise old man, but no one listened to him. In fact, he got angry once. If, he said, you don't listen to me, I'm never setting my foot in Moscow once again. Everything happened just as he had said.
Yeah, well, of course, it did come true, and you've mentioned this many times. I think it's a fair point. And many in America thought that relations between Russia and the United States would be fine with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, that the opposite happened. But you've never explained why you think that happened, except to say that the West...
All right, I am no longer going to inflict this upon you. You kind of get the idea. Is Putin insane? No. What Putin is doing is selectively editing what parts of history he presents to Tucker Carlson in order to justify what has happened. His argument is that Ukraine is not a real state. Obviously, that's stupid. Very stupid. Ukraine is a very real state. It's killing real Russian soldiers. This is, oh dear. I brought that up. Food shops to Sleeter chat with Wick. I was curious. I brought it up. The problem is Putin is not correct, and you will find 1,000 people who will tell you that Putin is not correct. But Russia has the ability to make its mythology realized. It's kind of what the heart of the... Here in the United States, it's what the heart of the culture war is about. The ability to actualize your mythology through controlling the present and the narrative. So, you'll see the same problem with Israel. Israel does that thing where they try to delegitimize the existence of Palestinians all the time, too. Don't buy it. Never buy the argument that someone is a group of people are not legitimate because they have insufficient history. They usually do have sufficient history. This is an argument of pure imperialism. It's the same case in Israel. They're making an argument of pure imperialism. I have to read this thing real fast. So what I'm going to do is throw you on a Give Me Money screen, and I'm going to do some music for a hot second. All right, that was horribly organized. If you were unaware, Wick did some shitty shit last night to food shops, where they basically told her that she'd have an opportunity to defend herself. Then he had on Brown Wu and ContraPoints and SFO to attack. Um, food shops while defending Vaush. It was some dishonest bullshit. Let's be perfectly frank. Incredibly dishonest bullshit. And food shops released the DMs in their server. I just read through them. They were not well organized, and Imager's weird to begin with. That kind of brings us up to tonight's second topic, huh? I don't really want to talk about Vaush, to be perfectly honest. I don't necessarily think I have much to add about that in particular. Except I sort of sat through this entire thing and kind of I sat with two particular thoughts. The first thought was I don't want to condemn someone for a fantasy. Because and follow along and there'll be rich rewards here. But the concept that you are going to do the thing you fantasize about isn't necessarily true. And like to take someone in Vaush's case or Food Shop's case, less so in Mr. Girl. This connects, but in a weird way. To take someone in that and to go around and suggest that because they indulge in this particular material, they are this thing, isn't accurate. For example, and we don't do it for other sexual proclivities even, there are non-consent and reluctance fantasies all the time on the web. You can find them very easily. And we don't call the people who read those or look at those rapists. Although, if they were to perform an act where they had sex with someone against their will, that would be rape. But we have this thing about lolly. And on the flip side, you gotta wonder, right? You gotta wonder what's what with that person. Like, I don't necessarily feel like I let food shops or Vaush babysit. But I'm not sure that's the problem. The problem as I see it is twofold. The first problem, and I started to feel this several years ago, if you remember back when there was the Wayfair cabinet thing, where a bunch of QAnon types got up and said, these Wayfair cabinet advertisements are actually hidden child trafficking advertisements. And I remember, it wasn't true, and I remember thinking at the time, this is a fairly politically motivated attack using the concept of child trafficking, and I guess we have to do the word PDF filing. So, I remember thinking at the time that we're in a bad place if we start to use these concepts as political and cultural attacks, and that it's going to be a problem for the head for us when we decide to start actually pursuing people who are harming children. Because what happens when you use something as a rote political attack is people become inured to it. They don't no longer care. They no longer take it seriously because everyone has a well-known reputation for just saying that. And I feel like this is a problem in the case of harm to children because it's so very difficult for children to get people to take them seriously when they say they're in trouble in the first place. Like, it's very easy to dismiss a child saying something that should throw up a red flag for you. It's a very common thing, right? So when Ethan gets up there and he says Vaush consumed this content and that makes him a PDF file, why isn't Ethan calling the police? Why is he doing this on stream? Like this is a serious accusation upon which someone could possibly being harmed. I don't think we should make light of these things. And that's what this is ultimately, is it's making light of it. And like, imagine you're in a situation where you have just made it harder for a child to get help in order to score a cheap point against an internet streamer. I don't think that's okay. I think we shouldn't encourage that behavior. So that kind of leads me to what I think is probably going to be a not popular take. I think that if you run around and you blithely label someone as a pedophile, as a harmer of children, that you are just as dangerous and harmful to them, to children, and the protection of children, and the job that parents have to do to keep their children safe, as actual pedophiles. Like, you're no better. So I don't think Ethan is much better than Vaush. If they are at all. I don't think there is anyone who's good here. I think that what was done on both sides is utterly disgusting. I think the people who try to spend an inordinate amount of energy trying to put pedo jackets on people need to be called out and stopped, because they are harmful to children as well. They are as dangerous, as bad, as brutally as because they are creating an environment where you cannot accurately discern what is what. Law enforcement agencies invest a great deal of energy into finding these kinds of people. They do not need the assistance of the Mama Maxes of the world. And it could very well be that even if they got it right and they correctly called the situation, that they have so tainted the case that no justice can be gained, and that person walks free. That kind of behavior needs to end. It needs to no longer be encouraged, and when it's called out, and when it's done, it needs to be called out. It's like swatting. It's like it's not good. It needs to stop. These people are just as dangerous, just as they perpetuate harm to children just as much as if they had harmed children themselves. And there's a second problem. The second problem is, well, a couple weeks ago, I was hanging out in a voice chat with some people and getting to know some new people and whatnot. And it was in Fairy Queen server. And the topic, amongst other things, the topic of Mr. Girl came up, and what happened with Mr. Girl. And a point was made by a number of people there where they brought up the fact that when Mr. Girl came out and said certain things, such as his review of the movie Cuties, or any of the other transgressive things that Mr. Girl likes to say for fun, that a whole host of people emerged who suddenly found that behavior that Mr. Girl was being accepted by figures like Destiny and other streamers, and decided that Mr. Girl's behavior is acceptable, and revealed that they too engaged in similar behavior, and a whole range of things from abuse to harming children, and that there was a concerted effort to start knocking these people out of spaces. The normalization of this kind of content of things like Lolly is not to be desired ultimately. Like, I sat and I thought about it. Like my leftist side goes against the part of me that is, you know, is supposed to be an uncle to my siblings' children and wants to see them safe. And ultimately, Uncle Daedalus wins out at the end of the day, because children are not capable of doing things like complex reasoning. They're not capable of understanding certain things. They're not capable of consenting. It therefore falls to the adults in their life to shield them from certain things that they're not ready for. And that includes people who might take advantage of them. So my fear is in saying that what food shops or what Vaush has done is okay, is that it lets other people decide that they can come out and be open about it and try to tell other people that it's okay. And it's not. I don't know how far our collective responsibility towards keeping the children around us safe goes, but I feel at the very least my job is, if I see something wrong, to say something, right? So I see this as wrong. I see this as unacceptable. Vaush should have apologized. He should have admitted what he did was wrong. He didn't. Is he done as a streamer? Probably not. He'll eat some lost subs and uh, carry on at close to 500,000. But he needs to step away from. He needs to step away from this until he can. Step away from active work in politics until he can be accountable. Um, and accountability is not something that you put on other people. It is something you do to yourself. And Vaush is clearly not ready to be accountable. Politics Up, bro. Send me a link of your best and most recent political video, and I will share it on my YouTube community hub. I will absolutely get that to you tomorrow, man. As soon as we're done here. Thanks for watching too. Yeah, he needs to step away from politics, I think, for the moment, because he is going to be a poison pill to anything he talks about for a while now. The ultimate thing, I think, is that we need to start being more careful about who we invest in, I think, is a better way to put that. Who we invest in as figures. There is a sense, I feel, especially in the last couple weeks, especially in the last couple months, as you've seen these fights develop, there is a sense that the old system that we have seen for the last couple of years that emerges out of the late 2015, 2016, 2017 era is falling away. That there's going to be too much baggage for certain figures going forward to effectively navigate out in the open and to be leaders. And I think it hampers our ability as leftists and as liberals and as people who are interested in the furtherization of human rights and democracy to be effective mouthpieces for those views. So I think what we have to do, what we have to start doing is we have to start looking towards the right kind of ideas. And I think a really good place to start thinking about that for us, us as individuals, is around you, your immediate vicinity. And to start being that kind of ambassador on a daily basis that would make people want to look towards your views. So the thing I want to encourage, start to encourage is this idea of local responsibility. Because if you look at how the right has done things for now decades, since the 1970s, is they have tried to take over local politics and use that to foist small-scale changes on a very large scale. Like, I'm not sure anymore, especially I was talking to Emily a couple days ago, I'm not sure anymore that the route forward for abortion rights is a national law. I think the route forward for abortion rights is to do what the right did and drive abortion clinics back into places on the basis of home rule and whatnot. And we need people who are going to be energetic on a local level to do that. Because it's going to have to start somewhere. And ultimately, national politics, especially now with so many things stacked against us, is a Hail Mary play. Everyone here in the United States is deeply concerned about Donald Trump getting reelected. Well, not everyone. There's a portion of people who want him to be reelected, and they're awful people. Don't listen to them. So we are going to sit here for 8 months, and we are going to worry and fret, and they'll be back and forth, and it'll be an election season, and elections in America suck. I know, I've lived through way too many at this point. And we don't need to look towards entertainers to carry that social burden. Maybe. But by the same token, I'm not entirely certain I'm looking around and seeing too many other people trying to organize on a large scale. I want good leadership. I obviously want to be a part of that discussion. That's why I run this channel. Anyway, I got a little bit off topic there. This weekend I had a good 30-40 minute phone call. I forget how long it was, Fairy Queen, where we kind of talked about this in the context of mental health and a couple other things, and sort of looking for not a silver lining, but the right way to talk about this, like a way that's not, getting into the same trap as everyone else where they're covering things, Vaush, as a content point, right? Relying on the Supreme Court rulings isn't a safe or effective way of change. I'm worried about gay marriage. Yeah, I think that's fair, Palm Dad, in a lot of ways. Like, I remember when we were throwing gay marriage on ballots in certain states, I felt dirty, right? I felt like, why should I vote for something that should be self-evident? The rights of another human being to be happy, to have a right similar to my own, shouldn't be up to the whims of a mob. But it's kind of always come down to that. At any rate, before I get sidetracked again, the idea is, and I need to talk to her again to see what we are doing. We both floated the idea of kind of coming up with a unified plan to, or at least present for people, a unified plan to kind of make safe the space and to put up a flag that this kind of behavior is not okay. That might be coming in the next couple weeks. My general suggestion was we take 2 weeks, we consult resources, and then have a productive discussion. I'll see if that's still going down, but that's kind of it. Like I said, we should sit around, kind of discuss what obligations we have towards this, towards people, as far as mental health emergencies or behavior we might consider harmful, and what reasonable steps can be taken. And like I said, we should probably consult professionals on that before we say anything out loud. So I have been in the process of doing that. I have been talking to some professionals about these things, which is, by the way, a really fucking fun conversation. I've had to explain to 2 therapists what lolly is. So that's fun. We're going to do a little bit of something else tonight that's, not horrible. But before we get to that, I want to give you this. Not now. There's a website on the House government.gov website, and it's pretty simple to use. You throw in your zip code. That's an old zip code of mine. You can't use it. And it tells you who your possible representatives are and invites you to input your street address so that you can contact them. And I bring this up because, as you might be aware, Ukraine aid has stalled again. $60 billion is sitting on the table, stalled in Congress because it will not come to a vote because of the House Republicans. And over that course of this time that this has been stalled, they first said, well, we need a border security bill. And they got a border security bill, and they said, well, that's not good enough, so we won't vote on that either. And then they said, okay, well, here's a straight-up aid package for Israel, which is objectionable in my mind, but whatever. Ukraine, and someone else who's even less relevant at this time. And then they said, well, we're not going to vote on that because there's no border security bill. So basically, House Republicans are, as usual, full of shit. I would invite you to take some time out of your day to go leave them, your representative, a message and tell them you want aid to go to Ukraine. And here's why. This money, this $60 billion, is largely going to go in American pockets at the end of the day. It's going to go to defense contractors, and they're going to pay workers to build shells. And then we're going to ship our old crap off to Ukraine. While we have sat here, the town of Avika, which we talked about on the 7th with the commander and the colonel, the town of Avika has fallen as of 2 days ago. Russians executed Ukrainian prisoners of war, mostly out of frustration, and the remaining Ukrainian forces have fallen back. Avika was a central point in the Ukrainian line that has held since 2014, when Russia instigated the LNR and DNR to revolt. It has been the site of incredibly heavy fighting now for months, and as Ukraine has run low on artillery shells, particularly because they're not being supplied from overseas, they have dropped their artillery precipitously to 2,000 shells a day. this is an artillery-heavy war because air power has a very hard time affecting the course of battle because of the air defenses and the insufficiencies of the Russian Air Force. Artillery matters in this war immensely, a great deal when you get down to it. We are holding up Ukraine's ability to defend itself. What has happened in Avika will happen over the course of the next couple months, all along much of the front line, if we do not get aid to the Ukrainians. So it's going to be house.gov, find your representative, easily Googled. Go there, find your representative, tell them you want Ukraine aid. And it's a simple message. Just send it to them day after day after day. Drown them in it. Pretend you're 12, you like a girl, and you don't know how else to do anything but tell her over and over again. And if your representative is a Republican, shame them. So with that, we've had a heavy evening. I think I'm going to call it here. I might come back tomorrow with something, but for the moment, I want to leave you with this to think about for a while. I'm gratified to see that some people showed up tonight, especially after a long absence. I hope you found this useful, and I want to thank you and I wish you a safe night, and have a good one, everybody.